All right, you are back and we are live. It is Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live podcast slash interview show slash YouTube live. I have returning guest, somebody that you all are familiar with, and a very interesting and amazing person, Christopher Rufo. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, man. So much to talk about. You know, when we originally set this up, I wanted to talk about your latest documentary because, I think that you're very well known for your CRT work and the journalism that you've been doing. And I just don't know that we're all talking about the amazing film work that you do as well with the documentary. But we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that a little bit later on. I think that there's a lot of current events happening right now and a lot of things people want to talk about, and so do I. But before we get there, everybody go follow Christopher Rufo on Twitter. Follow me at Jack Murphy Live on Twitter. If you're interested in masculinity, sovereignty, and brotherhood, sign up to the Liminal Order. That's liminal-order.com. All right, Chris, tell me, buddy, what were you doing on January 6th? What were you doing? Were you at home? Where were you? What was going on?
Yeah, I was at home in the office and just working. I've been shut down from my kind of main office in downtown Seattle since the coronavirus. Haven't been going in much, so I'm just sitting at home, and then heard a little bit in the rally, kind of the kind of peripheral part of my brain in the news, and then things started just really picking up, and I was like you and like everyone else, just glued to it for the rest of the day, and trying to make sense of it, trying to filter information through a variety of sources. And, frankly, trying to, hope that it would stop or turn around or that I had, kind of mistaken what was happening. But, I saw that you were there at the rally and then felt something was going wrong. So
Yeah.
I'd love to even hear you talk about a bit more. I could see it going wrong on Twitter, but, you felt it going wrong in real life.
Yeah. So I was at the rally, and first thing I noticed when I get there, I mean, there was just a ton of people. I mean, man, it was packed. I had like special VIP pass and everything. I still couldn't find where to go. I mean, there were so many people, more than at any amusement park or whatever. And there's all these like, things you got to walk through to get through. There's giant bags of backpacks that people have ditched because they wanted to get in to see the president speak. And, and I listened to the speech, and the speech was like, it wasn't like a super uplifting a rally speech that we're accustomed to. And it also wasn't a rallying cry to violence at the same time. It was just sort of a mundane speech where he went over especially a lot of the Georgia data, which is legit, right? I mean, Matt Brainerd, he put a lot of time and work into identifying actual people that voted twice or voted from out of state or dead people who voted or whatever. These things happen, And near the end of the speech, he was saying things that were not inciting violence by any means, but were certainly like, slamming Pence and calling him a coward and telling him to do the right thing. And, so there was like a weird energy there kind of. And then as I was getting ready to go down to the Capitol, I just started to see these sort of mobs of people that I hadn't seen around before. Guys carrying like football-sized American flags, marching down the street, screaming, "Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets." Very, very Antifa-like. Whole guys, dressed in black. I think it said "Sons of Liberty," maybe. Walking down the street chanting "Fuck Antifa, fuck Antifa," and it just the vibes were weird. And as I was deciding whether or not to go down to the Capitol, I started to check Twitter, and people were like, "There's a full-on riot going on here." And there was one part of me who's like, "Okay, there's a fire. Let's go run right to it," which is what I've been doing, which is what you do. But there was another part of me who was like, bad things are happening. And I knew that guys like Elijah Schaefer and Ford Fisher and a number of those other guys, and I think Shelby was down there, and Richie McGinnis, I knew that they were down there, and I knew that they were going to be covering things. So I decided just to get home and just start monitoring, just like you were. I mean, tell me what you were doing. Like, you're not watching CNN, right? Like, how are you monitoring what's going on down there on the ground?
I cycle through news, but really Twitter, I feel like, is the best source for on the ground live footage from a variety of perspectives, so kind of that was probably my dominant source in the moment for at least kind of on the ground stuff. And I know Ford Fisher, he actually worked as an assistant editor for me while he was still in college on America Lost, the film that you saw. So I know Ford, I know a lot of those guys, and however you spin it, it was ugly. I mean, it was really ugly at the beginning, and then as you got more and more information, it was even worse. And I think we'll be sifting through the information, the files, the footage, the social data. I guess the Parler information got hacked. That's all out there now. So there's going to be a lot of people sorting through everything, trying to deconstruct exactly what happened. But at the end of the day, it's a setback. It's a setback for conservatives. It's a setback for MAGA people. It's a setback for the country. And one of the things, and I've been talking about it too, is that you can condemn political violence, right? I condemned political violence, all last year, condemn it again at the Capitol. But we have to acknowledge the actual world that we live in, not the kind of world free of hypocrisy that we would like to live in. But the fact is that when the right riots, it is going to be a disaster in a way that when the left riots, it's not. And rather than complaining about the double standard, I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And, in a way, I've been reading a lot about the 1960s, and when the country was really flipped, when it was the mirror image, when more conservative, more establishment, kind of business and media people in the 1960s saw the riots in Berkeley or DC or at Yale or at the universities, they condemned it. Even the New York Times condemned the kind of riots and civil disobedience at the Pentagon that Norman Mailer captured in his book, Armies of the Night. And, that's the price. And it's built in. And sure, should it change? Ideally, yeah. Should we move towards changing it? Yes. To create a kind of more level or fair playing field or what have you. But that's not how politics works. And I think that it's doubly disastrous, both on the merits, and don't want to discount those at all. On the merits, it's a disaster. But also in the field of perception, it's a disaster. And I do wonder, truly where it's coming from, how people are feeling, what is driving it. And I'm looking forward to getting more of those answers in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, I talked to a source of mine at the DC MPD, and he has been spending all his time going over everything that happened there. And he told me, he's like, look, dude, this is going to be like a 9/11 commission style investigation. Like, it's going to take a couple of years maybe to really go through everything, get the timing down. Like, there were clearly entrances that were like busted down, and there were clearly entrances where they opened the doors and let people in. There were clearly instances inside where cops had their guns drawn and they were telling people to back up, and there were clearly instances where there were cops taking selfies and letting people walk around like they were tourists. So to understand how that all works together and what the order was and who was at fault is really going to take a long time to sift through. And now there's been an initial, firing / resignation. The chief of the DC, the Capitol Police, resigned right away. And my source at DC MPD told me that there was very clearly a disconnect going on between MPD and the Capitol Police. MPD, for example, has almost 3,000, I think, or more, 3,000 or more officers. All leave was canceled for that day. They were all on alert. They had what they call CDUs. I believe those are civil disruption units on standby, ready to go. And they knew that something was going to happen because in their experience, and they do 1,000 First Amendment actions a year, he told me. Mm-hmm. In their experience, large crowds, large problems, period, end of story. Doesn't matter who it is, something always happens. Capitol Police somehow didn't get the memo, wasn't prepared. People would like to say that Pelosi had a hand in it with the sergeant at arms of the House telling them to stand down. I don't believe that. I think that the more obvious answer is that they were just unprepared.
Yeah,
they were just unprepared, and they didn't get ready, and they didn't take it seriously. So it's going to take a long time to sort it all out for sure. But one of the things that you talked about is this, like, the double standard. And are you sick of talking about double standards, man? I am so sick of it. I do not want to hear or follow or listen or talk to anybody who all they do is talk about, well, when the left does it, this happens, and when the right does it, this happens. I mean, we have to like eradicate that from our thinking, right? Like, what's the proper model to consider things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to consider, right? It's the context of all the kind of political activity and political reality that we see. So I think it's important to hold it in your mind, but it's really a kind of very basic point to just say this is my point and that's it. It should be the kind of context or the background to trying to figure out how to actually change those conditions on the ground. And I think that what you see everywhere in the big cities, nationally now, you see a kind of asymmetry of information control and asymmetry of kind of information power. And it's one thing to say, well, looky loo, this person said this 5 years ago, and then they're saying the opposite today. I win the debate. It's like, no, you've actually lost the debate. The fact that you have to point that out and that it doesn't matter is literally evidence that you've already lost the debate. So you have to get much smarter. You have to get much wiser. You have to get much tougher, and you have to figure out what leverage can we use to change the reality, not change our kind of moral high ground, or kind of, you can win the kind of moral debate and lose the real debate. And ideally you want to win both. Yeah. But in politics, as we know, you have to actually win the practical debate if you want to protect people, if you want to advance your ideas, if you want to win in the political arena. And we've got to figure out how to do it. And I think that in a certain regard, we have to actually adopt some of the tactics, information tactics of the left. We have to kind of break them down, understand how they function, disrupt them on their side, but also adapt them on our side. I think that's a kind of key thing that we need to do. And then we also have to recognize that you can hold simultaneously how the world should be in your mind, but also acting in the world as it is. And I think that if you can do that, you're actually going to have more discipline. You're going to have more intelligence. You're going to have more wisdom. And I think that, the real conclusion for me in the debate, in this kind of debate about the Capitol riot or protest or political violence, however you want to phrase it, is that the dominant kind of right establishment has done frankly, and I'm part of it, right? I'm part of the kind of establishment right in a lot of ways. We've done a bad job at providing authoritative and kind of authoritative and persuasive information to our people. And I think you can say, I think without a doubt that when there's a collapse of authority, and then when there's also an emotional kind of register of fear, that's when the conspiracy theories come in. That's where anger comes in. That's where violence can make an entrance. And I think that we have to do a lot better job at communicating to our people what's happening, what's fact, what's fiction, what's the best strategy moving forward. And there's a lot of people like the kind of Lynn Woods and Sidney Powell's who frankly are out of their minds. And we also can't be scared to say that. And I take that to heart even with myself. A couple weeks ago, I thought, well, should I dunk on Sidney Powell or Lynn Wood? Does that really serve any purpose? Who's really kind of listening to those folks? I don't want to break my mentions on Twitter with people, arguing, conspiracy theories. Yeah. But maybe that was wrong. And maybe that's something that, I certainly could and could do better, is actually holding a line to moderate. And, the last little point I'll make on this riff is that the moderating influence has to come from within a political faction. You and I can't moderate the left. That doesn't make sense. That's not even, the word moderation, not even how the word kind of is formulated. But it's up to us to moderate the worst instincts and the kind of damaging propensities of our own side, of the people on the right. So I think we need to do a better job at developing authoritative information, a better job at moderating some of the really destructive and pathological and frankly kind of crazy influences on our side. And then at the same time, also develop a better strategy to kind of combat the kind of information advantage of the left.
Yeah. Man, you sure said a lot there. Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell plus Q, probably the biggest damage done to any efforts, legitimate efforts in the last few months here. I mean, aside from some of the more obvious things, it's just been really disappointing to see how they were able to siphon so many people off into cuckoo land. And when we say, it's important to remember, I think when we say that we want to moderate from within, that's not about censorship. That's not about shutting people down. That's about ridiculing them. That's about pointing out how wrong it is. It's about having a better answer.
Yeah.
It's about, I mean, what we call that, we have a word for it, it's called leadership, right? We need a little stronger leadership there. And the problem, though, that I think a lot of folks haven't really accepted yet, even though it's like so obvious, and it's become more obvious in the last week, is that there's a structural difference, right? Like people want to take the tactics of the left and use them. Okay, that's not going to work, guys. The reason why the tactics on the left work is because their strategic environment is totally different. They have the corporations, they have the establishment, they have the institutions, they have the media, they have basically everyone with power in the United States on their side. So when they riot, when they burn down cities, when they kill over 20 and 30 people all summer long, when they cause billions and billions of dollars in damages, when they advertise a literal siege on the White House, right? When they come down in May, and I remember this very vividly, man. Very vividly. I was there in May, and I remember them saying, Donald Trump's in his bunker, man. Donald Trump's in his bunker. What a wuss. Blah, 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 blah. Because he was in the bunker. Why? Because there was an assault on the White House.
Yeah.
Right? There was an assault on the White House, and nobody's reporting it like that. They were bragging about it. They were bragging about the fact that the president had to go into a bunker because there was a threat at the perimeter of the White House. Now, that didn't get reported like that, and we can't complain. We have to just acknowledge.
Yeah.
We have to just acknowledge that they have a whole ecosystem that allows them to riot and cause mayhem and then have it be reinforced in a positive way. We don't have that. We now, as a sort of, anti-woke movement, I don't even know if it's conservatism or rightism or whatever anymore. It's basically like woke versus anti-woke. It's like, are we going to be constitutional and liberty oriented? Or are we going to be, take from one to give to others oriented, which is what the left is all about right now. Doesn't matter. We have to figure out our own way forward. And right now we are back in this position of being sort of insurrectionists. I mean, not to use the word that they're using, but like it's an insurgency within this whole apparatus that has the corporations, institutions, university, the government, deep state. Now the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate all working against us. And so the future is sort of a long way away when you think about it like that. How long did it take for the left to get into the position that they're in now, which is to say total cultural hegemony, right? Total domination of the universities, total domination of our institutions, total domination of our technology corporations. It took them decades to get there. We're really far behind, man. So like, what do we do right now? What do we do in the long term? What is Christopher Rufo doing? What are the people around you doing? Like, understanding these circumstances, and it's a long road ahead. Like, what's the next step, man?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long road ahead, and I think we have to trace, as you've done, the long road behind. And it took 50 years, essentially. So in, 1968, 1967, you had the kind of first iteration of wokeness. You had kind of wokeness 1.0 in the kind of coming from the beat culture, coming from hippie culture, coming from the anti-war movement, coming from the kind of neo-Marxist, from the Europeans who had come over after World War II. But at that time, the institutions were controlled by people who had fought and won in World War II. They were controlled by the greatest generation, who had a visceral understanding of both the evils of communism and fascism, and then also the blessings of American society. And they were able to hold those kind of under 30s in check through the 1960s. And a lot of people forget, in the 60s and 70s, you had hundreds of political bombings. You had hundreds of airline hijackings throughout the 1970s before they had a kind of security protocol. You had political murders. It was to the next level to what we're seeing today. So on one hand, we shouldn't catastrophize. On one hand, we've been through this before, and we emerged from it. But on the other hand, it's quite different because, as you suggested, the institutions aren't controlled by our grandfathers. I wish they were. But no, they're controlled by the baby boomers who were kind of either in the 60s movement or adjacent to the 60s movement, who had absorbed all of those values. They're the people that are really now in charge. And, frankly, they're doing a terrible job. And I think there's really two ways I think that you can think about it. And you have to think about it, one, in kind of two levels. You have to think about it in the kind of, writ small, writ large, micro, macro, however you want to talk about it, kind of concrete and more abstract. On that kind of micro level, you need to basically, as an individual, as a family, as a network of friends, as a community, as a kind of your closest relationships, figure out where you fit in this new world, right? And for me, and I imagine a lot of us are feeling this way, as saying, okay, I've lived in San Francisco, I lived in DC, I lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in Seattle for the last 6 years. And at the beginning of this year, I said, that model isn't working anymore for a lot of reasons. I'm actually going to kind of move to a small town, a rural community with my family. That's been the best decision I've made all year by far, because the political dynamics were already changing even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And you need to be very honest with yourself. Where do I fit in? Where can I flourish? Where can I thrive? Where can I be, at home? So I think you're seeing a lot of that happening right now. You're seeing a huge reshuffling. And I think more conservative people in those blue cities and states are now fleeing to places like Florida, Texas, Idaho, Wyoming, all these different places. Montana is having a huge influx, where people are sorting themselves out where they can kind of live, to the best of their ability in their immediate term. Second, though, you have to think about the big picture. And you have to think about what's happening politically, what's happening nationally. You've seen the rhetoric from the people like the Squad. I mean, it's pretty scary stuff. It's not that they want to, have, a kind of British-style NHS that provides, healthcare. Yeah, they say that. That's part of it. But what they're talking about now is really a campaign of political vengeance. And they want to basically stamp out not only the president, but they want to stamp out the entire movement behind him. They want to stamp out all of the kind of conservative intellectual infrastructure. And we have to fight back against that. I don't think that we can necessarily fight back against that very strongly from kind of, living in Brooklyn and, making a podcast or whatever. But I think that marshaling the power within the states, within the jurisdictions that are red cities and counties and states, we can create a kind of counterbalance. And I think what we need to do is really work with those red state areas and legislatures to create a contrast where we say, we live this way, these are the outcomes. Other folks live this way, these are the beliefs and these are their outcomes. And I think that the more we can create that contrast, the more that we can actually live by example, we can demonstrate through evidence that this is actually just a better way to live. We can attract people to our cause, not through fear, which is an important tool, let's be honest, but also through the demonstration of excellence. And that's really, I think, like what we need to cultivate both as individuals, but also as communities and as a society, is a commitment to excellence, because excellence is the antidote to equity. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like either we're all kind of dumbing things down, we're going to that lowest common denominator, we're willing to tear people apart in order to assure a kind of baseline of equity, is kind of a calling to the lowest in a lot of ways. Whereas the call to excellence is a call for everyone, whatever your background, to actually try to move upward. And I think that's the kind of orientation that we need to have looking forward the next few years.
Yeah, man, living by example and leading by example is a very honorable and time-tested way of doing things. Problem is sometimes you're not in a fight with honorable opponents. And I can hear people in my head right now saying that we sound soft and we're not going to, take the necessary steps in order to win. but you have to have a multi-pronged approach. And so
Yeah.
let's just be clear. Whenever Christopher and I are talking about like what should we do, we're just talking about like one part of a bigger plan, right? Like with the liminal order, we're focused on the values that we believe in, that we think would make for our best kind of family or individual, family, community, and eventually a nation. And so we're living that out, right? We're doubling down. We put up a perimeter, and we're focused on our values and ourselves and building the power of our network. That's only one part of it, right? And there's so many elements that need to be enacted and in order to have a success. So, for the critics who are listening to us, we're like, oh, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we have to do, but there's some things that we can all do individually, and there's some themes that we can adopt as well. But as you were talking, I was trying to think about like what was different this time between now and the 60s. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is that in around the 1960s, and I talked to Matt Stoller, and this is in his book Goliath, quite detailed, is about there was a conscious decision by the Democrats to exclude the working white class from their party, and they wanted to become the party of the disaffected, of the women, of minorities, of the LGBTQ, even though it wasn't called that back then. That was a very conscious decision that they made, and so that has now really separated us in a way in which we're not just discussing different tax policies or different ideas on mundane politics. We're really talking about different systems of justice now. We're talking about a system in which we provide for liberty on our side, or where liberty is taken and then distributed to other people on the other side. And these ways of life are they don't jive. They don't jive. And so we're entrenched in a way that I don't think that we were in the past. And then the second thing that is different is that the tech tyranny is here. Yeah. And we're reaching a point where, as John Robb has explained very eloquently on my podcast here and elsewhere, that we're reaching a point in which the technology is going to become so powerful that there is going to be a moment, a tipping point, at which the techno tyranny is almost unstoppable. And whoever is in control of the algorithms, whoever is in control of the AI, whoever is in control of all of the resources that it takes in order to run a communication software or social media network, all of those are controlled by the same people. And one day that power may become so great that it's just going to switch, and no one else will be able to come up. It's sort of like a monopoly on tyranny, and they will have it. So it does feel like the pressure is a little bit hotter, a little bit more intense right now. And when you listen to the left's rhetoric, it is alarming. Man, it is alarming. We have sitting politicians using words like evil, like the MAGA people are evil, and they're seditionists, and they're rebellious, and they're revolutionaries. They won't use that word, insurrectionists. And when you start using language like that,
Jimmy Kimmel, I saw a tweet. He said something, I'll paraphrase, like, we need to cut the cancer out of our society.
Oh.
I mean, those are like... those are like eliminationist terms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second, because I know there's a lot of people who are worried. I mean, I'm worried. When I listen to the rhetoric, I'm worried. Years ago, I laid out case for the liminal order, which was, all of these factors we're talking about. They're 10 times worse now.
I know.
And then January 6th was like giving our enemies carte blanche. They have like a total mandate from their side to just go bonkers. And I'm afraid actually that at some point, the only limiting factor on the left is going to be somebody on the left. Somebody on the left is going to have to say seriously, like, no, we can't kill them. Right? Like at some point, somebody's going to have
we really
to
appreciate it.
Right? But like,
I know.
Who is it going to be? Where does the rhetoric of the left take us right now?
Well, a couple things. So I'll answer that, and then I'm going to go back and then forward again. So the rhetoric of the left, I lived in Seattle for a long time. I've studied Seattle, studied Portland. I've reported on it. I have sources all over. And I'll tell you that what's happening in Seattle and Portland is a really kind of future projection of what's going to happen nationally. And the moderate faction, the corporate Democrats, the moderate Democrats, the old school Democrats, they cannot stand up to the mob. They were unable to do it through all of 2020. They got crushed at the polls. They got crushed in the media. They got crushed on the streets. And they're now scattered and really powerless. So when the hard left accelerates to that point, The moderate left, I don't think is strong enough, either locally in the case of kind of the Pacific Northwest, or if it goes that way, nationally in the United States. So it gets a lot worse before any kind of change or inflection point can happen. But I think it's really almost, I was thinking about this the other day, it's like we forget how we got here. 1 year ago in January, right? Before the first coronavirus case, I think it was like almost exactly kind of mid-January. We're a couple days before the first case, if I remember correctly. Trump was headed for a landslide victory. You know, the economy was doing great. He'd kind of gotten through some of the doldrums. Everything was very strong. The Democrats were kind of in disarray. Joe Biden was, stumbling around campaign events. And Trump was, I think, poised for a landslide victory. And it's really crazy how these kind of unexpected events can change everything. You have a bat virus from Wuhan, China. I mean, what? Literally an invisible, microscopic bat virus from Wuhan, China, comes to the United States, and it changes everything. And the first thing is the virus and the lockdowns. I think we'll see on the lockdowns. The evidence is not fully in. I haven't made a kind of judgment. I think some intervention was necessary, of course, but the lockdowns were really the first step in this process. It caused chaos. It caused death. The virus caused death, and lockdown, I think, caused some death as well. But then you started to see this split where you'll remember that early on in the lockdown, kind of right-leaning protesters were protesting the lockdown as an infringement on liberty. You remember that.
Yep.
And the meme was, these people are, virus super spreaders, etc. Then Black Lives Matter happened. And even the scientific and medical community said, we're going to provide an exemption for these people to protest because they're right. So they shut down the country. Then you'll see what happening. You'll see that they shut down the news, right? You fast forward, then they shut down the news, right? Famously, the New York Post was on Hunter Biden. They shut down the news. They shut down the cities for Black Lives Matter protests. So the country, the cities, the news, and then they started just wiping out your account now. And I had neighbors, like guys that literally lived down the street from me, texting me or coming to my house like, oh, dude, I just got nuked from Twitter or Facebook. Like, I don't know why. These people are, a software programmer, and other kind of normal people that have kind of conservative accounts. And you see this cascade, really. It could have an alternate history could have happened without the bat virus. And now we're in the point where I think that we're very much fearful. And I know, people in my community are scared. The rhetoric is like white hot. The institutions and the technology companies and now the administration that's coming in are going to collaborate. And I think just kind of mop out all the information that they deem wrong, even if sometimes it's right. And this is an unprecedented and very scary example of private tyranny. And I think we need to convince our friends on the right that are kind of free market or libertarian oriented that private tyranny is actually in some cases worse than public tyranny, because you have no public recourse to it unless you actually legislate that. So I think that has to be one of the key initiatives on the right now. We need to create a new digital Bill of Rights to protect digital speech, which is different from, but equally critical to the speech as envisioned 200 years ago. And I think that digital Bill of Rights is a key component of our agenda moving forward.
Yeah. It's funny. We had opportunity to do that 2 years ago, especially. And Trump dicked around, and Republicans
I think Trump did. But, Trump is not a legislator, right? Trump is he's an entertainer. He's not a legislator. I don't think he thinks in those terms. And he delegated it to Paul Ryan, who I've been a longtime critic of, and Mitch McConnell, who I like a lot more. But those guys are not going to go for, free market, regulation of the free market. That's just not how they're built. It's not in their DNA. So yeah, Trump culpable for not pushing harder on it. But ultimately we have a legislature that is stuck in the 1980s. and is just now kind of opening its eyes to the reality that we live in today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of us were like libertarian when we were younger, and like
Yeah.
some idea of having the government get involved in business just sort of still kind of rubs you the wrong way. But then you have to look at it in a different light. Jack Dorsey set out to build the new public square, right? And guess what, dude? Congratulations. You
You
did
did
it.
it.
You did it. You built the new public square. Okay. So it's the public square and it belongs to the public now. Right. Like it's interesting how the internet was like spawned out of, government investment and DARPA and stuff like that. Then it went into the free market phase. And now it's kind of like we need a little bit of a government interference or assistance in this matter. Again, it's almost like a comparison would be if a private company built the interstate highway system and then just decided who got to drive on it, right? Like
Yeah.
that would be a very obvious circumstance in which you would think this is wrong, and that's what's happening. And it's almost not it's not just the social media companies banning specific users. I mean, dude, it's Amazon Web Services
Yeah.
saying you can't use the backbone of the internet. And one of the scariest things I've realized lately is that one guy owns the Washington Post, one guy owns the biggest retailer and cloud service provider in the country, and one guy owns the only place you can buy anything from anymore. That's that sounds like a big problem. That sounds like a big problem to me. And to say that conservatives can't be in favor of monopoly regulations or antitrust work is just a lie. It's been something that has happened traditionally. Teddy Roosevelt is a good example of a trust busting conservative. We have to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes there are extraordinary circumstances, and this is a circumstance in which there are extraordinary circumstances. We are on the dawn of a new age. We have built an entirely new infrastructure for society that exists on servers, and so we need to begin to regulate that. But I don't see I don't see that happening. What happened with Parler was just terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying to see how everything happened so quickly. Do you think, and we're just going pure speculation unless you
Yeah.
have any evidence here, do you think, like, how do you think that went down? Is there like a private, chat group between like Bezos and Apple and Google, and they're just like, okay, should we do it now? Should we do it now? What should we do? Should we do it now? Do you think it was coordinated, or do you think they just sort of watched? Like, how do you think that stuff works? Total speculation here.
Yeah, I'll speculate. I think that I don't know. I almost doubt that it is coordinated in the sense of people, the CEOs having their people call each other, and I think it's less I think it's less complicated than that. I think it's actually one large institution makes the call, and then the dominoes fall.
Yeah.
So as soon as think about it this way. I think that the App Store was like the first thing to come out, right? Didn't Apple say, we're going to give Parler 24 hours to do X, Y, and Z, or we're going to ban them from the Apple App Store?
Yeah.
But then before that 24 hours was over, Google Play dumped them, right? Because the narrative, right? The narrative that could formulate is, well, if Apple banned this app to keep people safe and to stop white supremacist terrorists from organizing, and it's up on Google, Google supports white supremacist terrorists. So it creates an incentive. Once one big player does it, everyone follows. And it's kind of like starts at the top, the Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon. And then like all the little vendors are like, well, I'm not going to get stomped out by if they're off of AWS and Facebook and Google, like I'm going to just cut ties too. So it starts with those key institutions and creates a kind of domino effect. But it also shows that, we have essentially monopoly or duopoly conditions in all of these digital enterprises. And let's be real. It's like people say, well, you don't want the cake, Jack, what's his name? The guy, the cake guy,
Bake the
well,
cake guy.
you said that he shouldn't have to bake the gay cake. So then Amazon should be able to decide whether it could nuke Parler. It's like, well, it's a completely different kind of size and scale. And these things really do matter, because if you're in New York City, there's 5,000 bakeries, probably something like that. I have no idea. But there's only one or two, in kind of the cloud space or the social media space of those companies in the entire world. So monopoly conditions kind of really have an important consideration, and frankly, they invite some kind of intervention. I don't think you can break up Facebook. I don't think you can break up Twitter. What are you going to do? Break up a company for retweets and a company for likes? It doesn't make any sense.
No,
But
but Apple, there is a little bit more of a logical split. It would be splitting off the App Store. That would be one way to do it.
sure, yeah, maybe there's for the other companies, there's maybe a better argument on how it might work. But I think there's a simpler kind of solution here. It's protection of individual rights. It's kind of elaborating on the right to free speech and interpreting it through legislation in a way to say, this is kind of the new public square, as you called it, as I've called it, and therefore these individual rights should be protected. I saw, and I didn't look into it too much, but I saw a headline that said Poland is basically trying to pass legislation now saying that in order for Twitter to ban speech on its platform, that speech has to actually be illegal, like incitement or harassment or stalking or what other kind of illegal forms of speech there are. But if it's not illegal, if it's just a political speech that you don't like, you can't ban it, you can't block it. And I think that that's kind of a good standard that we should try to codify in law, because these tech companies, in to be understanding of them, they're dealing with something very complex. Millions of users, millions of instances of speech per day. How do you regulate it? But I think that we can go back to the fact that we've had 200 plus years of First Amendment thought, of First Amendment kind of related legislation and court cases and enforcement mechanisms. Draw on that tradition to inform how we handle speech in the digital square, and then try to harmonize and reconcile those two things as closely as possible.
Yeah, when the Constitution was written, what was the circumstances around corporate power at that time? I mean, there was like the East India Trading Company. We knew that corporations were powerful. We knew they had done terrible things, right? But the idea that there would be communication corporations, technology corporations, basically like infrastructure corporations that were bigger and more powerful than the nation, in fact, globally, the most powerful entities on the planet, I don't think they really considered that, right? So, like, had they been writing the Constitution today, I think you would definitely include, freedom of speech in the infrastructure of the country. And so we need a complete rejiggering of the thought process to understand where the real power is. And what we're seeing is terrifying, right? Like on the left, they've been calling us fascists for 4 years, right? They don't have any idea what the word fascism really means. In fact, I went looking through definitions, and it appears that the definition of fascism has changed over time. The original fascist, right, Mussolini himself said that what fascism is when you can't slip a cigarette paper in between corporations and the state. It's when the corporations and the state are in perfect alignment, they're working together, they're one and the same. And right now, that's what we're seeing, right? We're actually seeing corporate government fascism together, where they're going to control who says what, who can do what, who can bank where you can have your money, where you can have your relationships, where you can conduct your business. And these are the things that people aren't really understanding, right? That we're actually facing actual real fascism. The corporations are more powerful than the government. So how, short of like blowing them all up, like we need to totally reconsider our perspective for the future. Only 25% of the users of Twitter are in the United States, right? It's like it's like a foreign entity that's on top of us, that's smothering us and controlling our political discourse. So how do we? I mean, this is a huge project, dude. Like, how do we change the public perception around the corporate power and fascism, what we really need to do? And are we really free if corporations that are owned by like Saudi petro funds, right, are controlling who we can talk to and when we can talk to them? How do we wake people up to that, man?
I think it's happening right now as we speak. I think that conservatives are feeling this fear, and they're feeling this sense of looming repression. And if the Biden-Harris administration doubles down on it, and the indicators to me seem like they will, they're going to feel it. They're not going to be able to escape it. They're not going to be able to ignore it any longer. And I think then the kind of conservative institutions have to adapt to that reality. And I think that that's kind of already happening. It's already been happening the last year or so, where people are kind of starting to change those perceptions. And I think, on the other hand, too, we have to remember that this happened with the kind of industrial boom a century ago, 150 years ago, where you had the kind of the physical industries. You had steel and railroads and oil and automotive. You had this kind of immense control, the robber barons or whatever you want to call them. And there was a time when that control started to have negative externalities that required some intervention. You talked about TR. And we're really at that same point for the tech boom, I think, in a lot of ways. I don't think that it can really be done in the same way. It's not like kind of antitrust, right? They tried it with Microsoft in the 90s. It was kind of a flop, right? Their antitrust with Microsoft. I don't think had a huge long-term impact. But I think that it's really about protecting the individual. And right now, the individual finds him or herself surrounded by these enormous forces that have control over life, but have no allegiance or loyalty to their community or to themselves. And this is a really unprecedented thing. You talked about the founders. I mean, the majority of Americans were kind of small farmers at the time the country was founded. It was, I think Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations came out in the same, in 1776, I think, or give or take a year or two. So you just started having industrialization. That wasn't really a thing yet. And we went through those growing pains. I think we're going through the same growing pains now. And I think that we have to be really savvy in how we fight, and really kind of practical and pragmatic, and just trying to figure out how we can create a coalition of people that are conservative or moderate or even liberal, who can champion this kind of protection of these essential rights that have changed, and then have legislators that are savvy enough to figure out how to actually mark this down in the general legislating power of Congress. And we don't have that. No one is thinking about it. No one is doing that work right now in a really detailed way. And I think we have 4 years of Biden-Harris in which to actually get those things ready, so that if we get a change in 4 years, we'll actually have something to do and not just say, well, let's do corporate tax cuts, because that's what we've been doing for so long.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with all of that, which sounds great to me, though, is that the corporations and the left, they're in alignment, man. They don't want anything to change. So the corporations aren't going to change. BLM, Antifa aren't going to change. Radical left isn't going to change. Moderate left is doing nothing, or whatever they've been doing. Hell, half of them are starting to come over this way. But until that alignment between the corporations and the left gets severed, until it gets forked, we're going to have absolutely no power. And I hate to be pessimistic, but I'm actually becoming more pessimistic.
Yeah.
In that, until that alignment between the corporations, Apple's, Google's, Facebook's, and not only that, all of the sports institutions, all of the sports leagues, all of the media companies, until they are separated from the Democratic Party, they're just going to double down on everything. It's only going to get worse. The time for what we're talking about now was like 4 years ago. Now something else is going to have to happen. We're going to have to escalate, because they are escalating. There's going to be no brakes. I'm saying, who is going to put the brakes on the people on the left? It's going to have to be somebody on the inside, and there's no one. Who do you know anybody that has the ear of the left and the corporations, who is a Democrat, that is a reasonable person, that can actually exert influence to slow things down? Do you know anybody? Is there anybody?
Yeah, unfortunately, though, they've been kind of kicked out of the left, right? You have the whole group of kind of center-left intellectuals and writers and political folks. They've been booted, right? They're no longer kind of welcome. So, and then I think at least I'm trying to welcome them into a coalition with the right. But I think that, again, looking at Seattle is a great test case, right? Where you have Amazon headquartered in downtown Seattle. Seattle also one of the most kind of leftist cities in the country. And it's this really uncomfortable alliance where the corporations in Seattle signal all day long on the social issues, right? They're like pure libertarian corporations, where they're saying they're, sponsoring the, Pride Parade and, doing diversity trainings and, encouraging the pronouns in the bio or whatever kind of the thing du jour is. But they're very kind of ruthlessly protective of their bottom line. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for maybe a wedge, where, the companies, there was like a high earners tax, and there was a corporate tax, there was a employment tax that was going through the Seattle City Council in various versions over the last few years. And they put a stop to it. They said, no, this tax is a bridge too far. We're going to push back on this. And I think it's an uncomfortable alliance, right? Where they're saying we are progressive on social issues. We're going to, Nike, same thing. We're going to, sponsor Colin Kaepernick. We're going to, BLM all day long. But we're ruthlessly looking for the cheapest place to do business in Asia. It's China or Vietnam or Cambodia. And we're going to fight at the local and state legislative level in Oregon to maintain our corporate competitiveness. So I don't know. That's a good question. I've long been wondering, at what point do those things start to clash? Because the left is using culture eventually to influence economics, right? The goal of all these folks is to have a kind of Marxist or democratic socialist redistributionist state. That's the ultimate goal. If you look at the policies, you look at the literature, you look at the kind of sloganeering. At a certain point, the corporations are going to say, oof, we like the culture stuff because we pay no price for it, right? But this economic stuff is a problem, and they're going to go looking for allies. So I don't know. I really think it's, it remains to be seen if that's truly the dynamic and on what timeline it would occur.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we needed was an acceleration of red pills, right? Like, we need more people to be red pilled. We need people to experience what happens when CRT comes to their elementary school and their 7-year-old comes home and says, I hate being white. We need more people to have experiences like that so that they can be shaken out of their fog and realize that all the things that we've been talking about aren't fake, right? It's not a dream. This is real stuff that's happening. But what I'm worried about now is that January 6th really just is going to put damps on that. It's like now everybody on the left and even the moderates, and man, if you watch CNN, dude, the way that they talk about this is the revolution, these are insurrectionists, they should be put down, this is evil, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, la la. Like, this is the message that's being pumped into people's brains. So like, any opportunity for those red pilling process to accelerate seems to be squashed at this point in time. And the reason why I'm feeling so urgent, if this was 1925 or whatever, just saying, sometime a long time ago, when the cycles were shorter and when technology was less of a factor, you could say, hey, let's regroup. We'll take back the House in the midterms, and then we'll come back with a strong candidate. And, the ship will only have been just a little bit off course. But not now. Not now. The window is so short because the long night of tyranny, tech tyranny, is coming. It is coming, and whomever is in control at the time that inflection point hits, they're going to be the ones that might be in control for a long, long time. If we can't talk, if we can't assemble, if we can't bank, if we can't conduct transactions, if we can't do anything, then none of this resistance is going to be have any positive outcome. And so I'm feeling very anxious, and anxious not in like anxiety, but anxious in like, we have to do something now. Like, the time is now. We have to start acting in a way that's totally different and with a different perspective. And this is why I look back at January 6th and with such, I was saying before, I was conflicted or mixed feelings. I have nothing but negative feelings now about January 6th because nothing was gained. Only things were lost. We gave away.
And nothing could have been gained.
No.
What, I mean, really, like, what were they going to do? It's like nothing could have been gained. Either, and frankly, and this would, I mean, again, I think we need to have a kind of brutally honest kind of recognition of the facts. It's like a lot of this was to kind of support the kind of ego of the president. Yeah, and a lot of this was to bolster his kind of primal horror at being a loser.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's politics. It's the coronavirus. It's a lot of things. I mean, I voted for him. I wish he would have won, but like, I think that he's kind of dragging stuff down with him in this kind of feeling. He really enabled Lynn Wood. He enabled Sidney Powell. He enabled all these people to fill this vacuum of leadership, and they led good people. A lot of good people around the country who, voted for the presidents. 75 million people. He led those people into this kind of trap in a lot of ways that was designed with no positive outcome, right? I really don't think that there was any potential for gain, and it turned out to be a kind of catastrophic loss in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
I think you can say that and also say, hey, I voted for the guy. I wish he would have won. He did a lot of great policies. But like, okay, now what do we do? Because we're in a different world in this kind of post-Trump world. And I think you're right. But I'm going to try to buoy your spirits. And anyone listening who's kind of down in the dumps, I'm going to share 3 things that I think are important. Reasons for optimism. One is that there's still a filibuster. For big legislation, you're still going to need 60 votes. And if they change that, it's going to be a kind of nuclear change and really going to galvanize the right for massive victories in 2 years. So we still have one final safeguard as far as the federal government. Look at state and local governments. State and local governments are really strongly Republican right now. They actually did pretty well. I almost forgot. Didn't we gain seats in the House? I mean, or didn't we not gain seats, but didn't we kind of... or I think we did gain seats.
We did.
It's almost like erased from my memory. It's a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, hey, and then at state and local level, we're very strong. There's a lot of good kind of structure there. And then also, I think it's important to remember on the speech issue that I'm going to have to phrase this carefully. Even given the kind of looming tech tyranny, or however we want to call it, we still have more capacity for individual speech than ever in our history. Like the fact that we're doing this podcast now, the fact that we have between us a couple 100,000 Twitter followers, the fact that we've built an audience, in some cases through mainstream channels, in other cases directly with the audience, we shouldn't forget that that's a really new development. And as it stands right now, we have, I think, more channels for speech than ever. At the same time, we need to be careful so that they don't close down immediately. But I think that the fundamentals, the real kind of true fundamentals, are not all lost. And I think that with some protections, with some kind of bulwark against kind of tech monopolies and tech tyranny, I think we can maintain this space. I think we have to. And I think the other thing we have to do is we have to also start speaking out for people that are kind of in this banned or unpersoned state, that are unpleasant people or have opinions that we disagree with. I think we need to kind of channel the old ACLU. I mean, the ACLU of yesteryear famously defended the Klan. And it is a brutal position, right? To basically say, I vote to protect all of these kind of all of the speech that is bad or wrong or terrible or whatever. But I think that it's going to take an enormous amount of courage on our part, on other people's part, to actually stand up for these principles in the face of this kind of shutdown, this kind of squashing that's happening, especially in the last few weeks.
Again, among a million other options and things that need to be done, one of the things that we need to do is continue to act locally and think locally, right? And I know that this is probably old hat and it's something that people always say, but it is more important now probably than ever to think locally. Run for your local sheriff's office in your county, right? Like, do something. Go to the school board meetings. Make sure CRT doesn't get into your classrooms. Join your local ANC commission. Like in DC, we have these small neighborhood, advisory groups. Like join those things. You got to do something. But I think the bigger picture, the more strategic picture, is that all of the institutions that we have relied upon have been captured, right?
Yeah.
They've been captured, and they're not coming back. The media is not coming back. Corporations are not coming back, for now, at least. The universities aren't coming back. And popular culture probably not coming back either. So we need to build parallel institutions, and not institutions, but now we have to build networks, right? That's the new evolution away from institutions is towards networks. And so it's never been more important now to be thoughtful and mindful and intentional about the networks that you build. And I don't just mean your personal networking, like old school, like business networks. I mean, like, we need to look towards networks to provide education. We need to look towards networks to help us provide health and medical services. We need networks to provide business and professional opportunities. Hell, with crypto, and I'm not an expert, but you can even use networks to build your own currencies that you believe in, that you have value. You need to build communities where you can live, work, and play with people that share your values. Now, listen, guys, I understand that this is not going to be the only answer before the comments are filled up with all kinds of things like they're going to Waco you, they'll Ruby Ridge you. Yeah, I understand all of that, but it's like, okay, so they're going to do that. We know that there's going to be a new Waco coming, right? So what, you're just going to not act because that may happen? No, you still have to keep doing it. You still have to build. You still have to create, and you still have to sort of resettle. I've been using this phrase, resettle the American frontier. We need to resettle the actual physical American frontier by moving to places that respect your rights and will have networks of sheriffs like they did in Virginia, who stood up and said, if you pass these laws in the Capitol, we will not enforce them. You need to find places like that. And people are moving there. But not only that, we also have to resettle the information frontier. We need to develop networks and systems that are off these main highways where you can maintain communications with people. Like liminal order for us, we use a highly encrypted, secure, end-to-end encrypted, offline, totally private, ephemeral messaging system, and we'll never be separated. Not only we have that, we have email lists, we have websites, we've got snail mail, we've got phone numbers. There's so many ways that you can communicate and build your network that don't rely on using Twitter or Facebook or even YouTube. And we're going to have to continue doubling down on that. And, they always said, build your own, build your own. Okay. And so they did. And Amazon Web Services, Google and Apple can act in concert to get rid of you. But there are ways, and we have human ingenuity, and we will figure out ways to get around those systems. But like, localism was a thing of the left, if I remember a few years ago. Eat local, live local, right? And now it's more of a thing on the right. It's like you gotta establish your local networks for food, for medical services, for education, for everything, because all the other institutions are corrupted. And we're just at a point where there's no playbook, dude. There's no playbook for this. There's nothing. There's no circumstance in the past. Sure, there was political, cultural, civil, racial, whatever circumstances that were similar, but you add in the tech side, and there's never been a moment like this in time. And so we're gonna have to just create a whole new system and think with our big brains, Chris. Do we have it in us, man? We do, don't we?
I think we do, and I think we have it in us. And I think your point about the kind of local networks and in real life networks. I mean, I've certainly have been thinking a lot about that, having moved out of a big city to a very small town, less than 10,000 people. And the difference is enormous. And I think if a lot of kind of affluent, educated, ambitious, conservative people living in the big cities, feeling alienated, feeling afraid, feeling unable to kind of express themselves, it's a good option to kind of just hit the eject button and get out into a different kind of community. And I'll tell you, my wife was really sick, and a couple of months ago was in the hospital for a week. And the community here, people that I had just met, months prior, they organized bringing food to me and our kids every night. Different group of people come organizing food, bringing over groceries, bringing over dinners, trying to help us out, seeing if we need anything, bringing, care package to my wife in the hospital. And it's like those networks, even of just your neighbors, when you have kind of similar values and you're like-minded, it's enormously powerful. And, I went from living where a lot of people, would get so mad if I was on Tucker Carlson or whatever, to like my neighbors now who are like, oh, dude, I saw you on Tucker last night. Amazing job. Like, high five. Yeah. And that like just liberates you. It frees your mind of all of those kind of, all of those things that you're just like, kind of preparing in your head to confront or even kind of just being kind of judicious in what you say and what you don't say to people, it's kind of opens up. And I think your idea of resettling the interior, right, or the frontier, in a lot of ways, is one that's wise. And I think that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it didn't really matter, honestly. Living in the Bay, and I lived in Berkeley, I lived in LA, and it's like your politics. It didn't really matter. Your politics are fine. You can't say everything, but you can never really say everything anyways. It has changed. It's changed in the last few years. And I think that you need to be willing to kind of make changes. And I don't know. What about you? I mean, what is 2021 looking like for you? How are you going to kind of implement some of these policies?
We're doing it, man. The liminal order was designed in response to this very matter and these issues. And so we have created a very intentional network that spans the country. In fact, it spans the globe. And we're adding people at a rate where I can't even keep up. We've thousands of people on the waiting list, and we can only manage to process about 40 or 50 new entrants every month, and we're really working hard at that. Wow. And one of the things about the LO that has just been amazing has been, one is the sense making, just being able to make sense of the world and have actionable intelligence and actionable data to save your life. We knew Corona was coming months before any shutdowns, and so people were really prepared. And so that was one element I was thinking about when I said that your networks can make you healthier, right? And then just like the community aid element of the LO has been amazing, because like we've had guys go through personal crisis, or somebody was sick, or we had somebody who had like had a miscarriage, and we raised money for them in like 5 minutes, raised a few $1,000s, and we bought them groceries, or we sent them, food, or we did something to help them solve a problem immediately. And, I'm not slagging on everybody's church community, but the one thing that struck me when this guy was very thankful. He said to me, everybody around me has said, let me know if we can help. Let me know what we can do. And he said that guys in the liminal order didn't ask. They just acted.
Yeah.
They just acted. And so I'm not trying to slag on anybody else. I'm just saying that, like, if you got to put yourself in an intentional community, everything has to be intentional now. I feel like in the past, you could sort of accidentally just find yourself in a good spot. Because there were good spots sort of all over the place. But now you have to be very careful, and you have to be very deliberate. And it's a travesty to say that we have to watch what we say. And I have neighbors, who I know are very active politically on the left. We don't ever talk about anything, man. All we do is we just say, and we don't know, like they don't know about me really. We just say, hey, how are you? Have a great time. We're very nice, very nice. But like if they knew, I think that the story would be, a lot different. And so intentionality is something that's going to be important for us moving forward. And just sort of building. We have to build. We have to put down roots. Eventually, this is going to come to a head. Whether it's 4, 5, 10, 20 years from now, this is going to come to a head, and there is going to be destruction. And I don't mean necessarily human lives, but I do mean institutions, and I do mean corporations, and I do mean networks, and I do mean professional careers, etc. So we want to build something that's going to be standing when that happens, right? We're beginning the process of root building and construction now.
Yeah. So
that in time, if it needs to be, we will be ready and we will be, set up. And I think technology provides us an opportunity. Technology provides both the source of the problem, which is we're in different tribes, but we live next door to each other.
Yeah.
And then it also provides opportunity in that you can be part of a community that doesn't have that isn't about just where you are living locally. And so while technology has brought on a lot of problems, it is also sort of the way out in some ways.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been doing, man.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll share a couple things too, because I think it's always valuable to share a bit of the kind of personal, right? Because you can bloviate in the abstract, but it's like, well, what are you actually doing? That shows you what someone's values truly are. And I think that geography is important. Geography is important again, weirdly, right? In this way, and that like. Yeah, like you want to maybe, especially if you're politically engaged, you want to be near people that are like-minded. You want to be near people that will stick up for you. You want to be near people that you can be yourself around. So in that way, geography is really important. We're seeing this huge shift in geography right now as people kind of move and sort themselves out. And then technology, right, is on the other side. And in some ways, geography is less important. I think that harnessing technology, creating technology, engaging with technology is a way where you can have kind of remote work becomes a real possibility, where you can still have those kind of access to affluence from a small town or a rural community. And during the French Revolution, right? The Girondins, the kind of moderate faction, or even the kind of, in addition to then some of the bourgeois and the nobles, the people who survived were not in Paris, right? All of those people got whacked. The Girondins who survived were the people that retreated to the country. They retreated to the kind of provinces. And those people kind of, had their little protection networks, had their friends and family, were able to kind of weather the storm to a much better degree. But I think, too, it's like thinking in real life, right? It's the 21st century. How do you harness technology to make a living? Do you do remote work? Do you have multiple sources of income? Do you have a kind of a small business to supplement kind of wage income? And I think that's really important. That's something I'm doing, and my family's doing. We're trying to figure out, all right, how can we diversify income? How can we have 5 or 6 kind of significant income streams that if one gets shut down, we still have 3 or 4 more to go? How can we make investments that are potential for growth, but also don't have a kind of downside vulnerability, right? And even kind of how can we make investments that are portable, that are easily liquidated, that are easily kind of moved into more productive assets, or kind of abstract and tangible? And how do we have a network? And it sounds, honestly, I'm not a gun person, right? I'm not a gun person at all. I kind of more kind of bohemian in nature, but it's like at this point you really do have to think, how can I have kind of even a local network of protection? And with your neighbors, with other people in your community, where you're on a text list, where it's like the emergency text list, where you can mobilize 10 guys to help out if there's some sort of trouble or incident. And I almost feel strange even going there, but I think all of these things are pretty necessary to be self-reliant, to be autonomous, to be secure in your livelihood and your family and all of the things that you want to do. And I think that these are all kind of prudent measures, and I think that there's a lot you can do. And I'm glad that you're doing it. You're developing a kind of mode for doing it, and then teaching other people to how to be. And all this stuff makes you stronger. It makes you anti-fragile. It makes you robust. It makes you, just gives you that sense of kind of self-making, where you can be confident in yourself and confident in your capacities, confident in your network. And honestly, it's been great for me, and it's something, that journey for me that's just beginning.
Yeah. A lot of people in my comments and stuff, they look to me to like have answers for the national political problem. And, look, guys, I don't. Right. I have ideas. I have some ideas, theories and whatnot. What I have always really tried to focus on is like, how can individuals survive? How can individuals get better? What can we do as individuals as part of a larger mosaic of actions that need to take place? What can we do as individuals? And so one of the things that I've been focusing on with my guys and talking about a lot on Twitter lately is this idea of info homesteading, right? Like homesteading itself is very attractive right now, being self-sufficient, being off the grid, being able to protect your family and have a place where you can retreat to, of course, until you get Waco'd, but that's another story. And so being able to live off the land, right? That's very exciting and interesting. Now let's make a parallel to that, to information. There is an entire information wilderness out there waiting to be harvested. There's more of an informational universe than there is actual real life universe, because it's so vast and infinite, basically. And what people need to do is learn how to be an info homesteader. They need to learn how to make money in the information age. They need to learn how to make money that's location independent. They need to learn how to make money within a network of like-minded people that want to support you and support your ecosystem. And there's even ways to make money in the info universe off of your enemies and off of people you don't like. You can just like leech out of them in some capacities. And so I want people to be focused on hey, how do we take care of ourselves in the physical world, and how do we take care of ourselves in the information world? And for me, the goal when I was younger, this idea was like, I want to be off the grid, right? You want to be off what, power and electric and sewer, because you want to be independent. But that's no longer the ideal. The ideal is to be off the grids you want off of, but on the grids that you want to be on. And the grids you want to be on are that helpful, productive community that you've built, the helpful, productive networks that you're a member of, the grid that allows you to do your info harvesting and out there homesteading in the information landscape. And so we're a little ways away from the technology making all of that possible, but it's not too early to start working on it and to start building those independent sources of income, and sort of just detaching and separating out of the go to college, get indoctrinated, put the debt handcuffs on, go sit in a corporate job where you get fired at any minute and the HR department thinks that you're waffle because you're a white guy. You don't have to do that, folks. You don't have to do that anymore. There are other options. And that's part of what we're doing. The LO is just trying to put those ideas out there and to give guys the tools to be able to be self-sufficient and not have to rely on a corporate master who wants to see you sick, fat, in debt, and forever a slave working in your cubicle. And so all the guys out there that are watching this right now while they're at work, I'm saying, man, if you just get started now, in a year or 2 or 3 years, you will begin to see the rewards. And it's not too late. It's not too late. And this is a long game. And you really, really have to get going. Info homesteading is my theme for 2021. On the grids you want on, off of the grids that you want off of. And I think that that's part of the solution among much larger umbrella guys in the comments. Yes, there's a lot of other things that need to happen. But from an individual, what can I do for me and my family and my community basis right now?
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself.
And you have to start there anyways. I think that the kind of, if you are not secure, stable, resilient, kind of autonomous in your own life, how are you going to change society? And so I think that the network you're talking about is, the stronger you become in your own life and autonomy and networks and grids, the more influence you'll be able to have with other people. So I think they're mutually reinforcing. You're not saying, well, don't worry about, X, Y, and Z. You just retreat into your private sphere. It's like, no, work at both levels simultaneously and they reinforce each other. And I think too, even for corporate, because I know there are a lot of guys and women that are navigating a corporate career. And, I think those opportunities are also changing. And, remote work is enabling, if you are a highly skilled technical person, you can pretty much leverage and negotiate remote work and make those big corporate salaries and benefits, but having like pretty much physical control over your life and having the kind of distance of being able to work from home, even in a highly skilled profession. So all of that is changing. And I think that's going to change the concentration of power in these tech companies over the long term, right? If you have, 40,000 people working at Amazon HQ in Seattle, they're going to be highly influenced by Seattle culture. If all of a sudden you have only 5,000 people working at Amazon HQ in Seattle and 35,000 people working in Idaho, Florida, Montana, Wyoming, DC, you're going to have a dispersed culture as well. So I think that would change, hopefully, these dynamics. I know companies are increasingly moving in that direction. And I think that there's so much opportunity out there. If you are highly skilled, you are savvy with technology, you are, connected with a group of people, like it really does feel like, despite these big challenges that we're talking about, right, which are depressing and frightening and scary, prepare for those. But also, like, sometimes, it's better to find an opportunity than to solve a problem. And sometimes you just have to say, all right, this is bad. I'm going to hedge against it. I'm going to protect against it. But there's this huge opportunity over here. And you're often better served doing that. And I'll share one example, even my own work. Like, I was working for a year and a half in my research work, my political work, my intellectual work on homelessness, mental illness, addiction, crime. Those cluster of issues that affect predominantly large blue cities. And I genuinely wanted to make a difference, do the research, do the reporting, advocate for new policies. Impossible. Really? Am I going to change the policy in San Francisco or Seattle or LA? And then it's like, okay, I'm hitting a big wall here, and people really, hey, can I support your work? Can I do this? Can you double down on this? Can you do this? And even with people that are like bringing, big checks to support my work, it's like, I'm starting to say, I started to say no, and then explore new avenues, looking at critical race theory. Well, critical race theory, honestly, probably a more important issue, but also a wide open playing field where you can get results. And it's like a year and a half on homelessness, some tangible results. I'll give myself credit. Had some investigative scoops that leaked, but no kind of fundamental results. Critical race theory, within kind of 120 days, had a kind of national victory. And I think that metaphor I'm trying to apply to my life is saying, all right, what am I doing that is that dead end or that problem that I think I need to solve, but I might not need to solve? And then what are those things that it's like, this is just an open field and just go run shop in it, because this is just a wide open thing and I'm uniquely skilled or uniquely qualified to go make it happen. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, tackling homelessness and drug addiction, psychological problems, and the hollowing out of American industry and opioids and the lack of labor mobility and whatnot, all very covered. Do you want to give a quick plug for the documentary, man? Because really fantastic. And it was something that we were going to talk about in depthly today.
Yeah.
But go ahead and give a quick plug for it, guys. I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
everybody.
sure. Yeah, it's I directed a film. It actually broadcast nationally on PBS at the end of last year. So before being a kind of a right intellectual, I was a documentary filmmaker, directed films mostly for PBS, one for Netflix, and this is a story of three of America's forgotten cities: Youngstown, Ohio; Memphis, Tennessee; and Stockton, California. And I follow families that are going through this kind of devastating economic, social, and cultural landscape, trying to figure out how to survive. I mean, truly how to survive. And looking especially at kind of family, how that's been really kind of destroyed in working class communities. And then looking at some bright spots like faith, looking at some bright spots for these kind of individual human stories. And
Where can people find it, Chris?
yeah, it's called America Lost. Anyone can watch it for free at my website at americalostfilm.com/premiere. Make sure to put the link in the show notes, americalostfilm.com/premiere. Just enter your email. You can watch the whole thing for free. You can pay for it on Amazon, but for all the liminal order folks, the Jack Murphy fans, you can watch it all for free. And I think the film speaks to some of the like root issues that we're facing and trying to navigate. And I think it's important for us to kind of make sense of the top line issues. What happened last week? What happened, with Trump? What happened with the voting? But the film gets in a couple layers deeper, looking at these tectonic shifts in economics, in society, in culture, to try to look into kind of where things have all gone wrong, and looking at it through the eyes of people who are the least kind of buffered from them, right? And the people who, frankly, you and I can navigate these changes nimbly and successfully and actually kind of make positive out of them. For a lot of people who are born into tough circumstances, who don't have a family around them, who are set up really for failure in some ways, looking at those cases, looking at that section of society is illuminating, not only to say, hey, what's up with people who are in the kind of working class or the underclass, but actually for all of us to say, how is society working where it's creating these outcomes? So yeah, I think it's. I'm partisan for it, but I think it's an important film, and I hope that everyone who watches it gets something out of it.
Everybody should watch it. It will certainly put the concept of white privilege into new perspective for folks. White privilege for the men of Youngstown. involves having all the factories move away, involves having all the industry move away. It involves not wanting to leave your family, involves being there on Social Security, being inundated with opioids, and living in an environment of decay and disease and sadness and death. That's white privilege for the folks of Youngstown, Ohio. And it's fascinating to me how somehow the whole plight of the largest group of poor people in America, white people, how that has just been completely eradicated and swept under the rug, or not eradicated, but the discussion around it completely squished by white privilege and people pointing at a few white guys at the very top and saying, oh, all white people are totally privileged. They have easy street. They have everything they want, blah, blah, blah. It is a really sad thing to see. And of course, this is part of the phenomenon that drove working class Democrats, blue dog Democrats, Reagan Democrats away from the Democratic Party and into the new Republican Party and into supporting Donald Trump, a huge factor in the Democrat to deplorable phenomenon of 2016. I wrote a book about it. Please check it out. I talk about a lot of these very same issues. And now that we're getting into it, I do want to talk to you about one of the very specific notions. Globalism is predicated on the idea that there is a freedom of travel for capital, which is money and machines, freedom of money, freedom of machines and infrastructure, and freedom of goods and services, and freedom of people to move all over the place. And so there's this idea that if one industry dies, another one will be born, and people will just move over there, and they'll have a brand new life in a brand new city. It's called labor mobility, right? So tell me, did you see in your evidence, in your experience of interviewing Youngstown, formerly the crossroads of America, right? No longer. Is labor mobility a real thing? Did people who lost their jobs in Youngstown, did they just be like, all right, guess I'll just be moving to, Silicon Valley now to partake in the new economy that has left me totally, jobless and penniless? Did you see that kind of thing happening? Labor mobility.
Yeah, I think it's not a yes or no. It's kind of a split labor market, right? So yeah, the people who grew up that were the sons and daughters of the judges in Youngstown, the doctors in Youngstown, the accountants in Youngstown, those people have high labor mobility. They're like, man, I grew up in Youngstown. I'm getting out of here. I'm gone. I'm going to Yale. I'm going to Stanford, and then I'm never coming back home. But what you have at the kind of bottom end of it is that people who are more attached, who are less kind of capable or less able to move, those are people that stay. So you have a flight out at the top, a kind of brain drain effect, but you also have a rooting down at the bottom. So you're left with, like, in some ways, the worst of both worlds. You're losing your leadership class in a place like Youngstown, but then you're concentrating some of those social challenges: addiction, crime, mental illness, alcoholism. I mean, all of those challenges that you see over and over and over in Youngstown, they become more concentrated, and then subsequently people are less able to move. So the idea is great, right? That everyone can move. We could create a ghost town out of Youngstown immediately, and everyone will scatter and come up with better opportunities. But real life doesn't work that way. There's tradition, there's culture, there's institution, there's family, there's bonds, there's incapacities, there's all of these things. And then not to mention the fact that, these cities are also propped up by the federal government. The federal government dumps in tons of money into these cities. So they're keeping these cities on life support on one hand, and on the other hand saying, why don't you leave? Why don't you move out? So we have this kind of weird paradoxical situation where nobody is willing to truly let these cities die, which I understand. It's a reasonable point of view. But then we're also setting the expectation that if you live in a dying city and you don't move, you're a loser, you're a kind of underclass moocher, you're a whatever, which is like not quite fair. It's not quite a consistent position. So, what I saw is like just sad, man. It's like people growing up in a dying town, and the kind of men are either on disability or work in the black market. You see women, like one woman that we met when we were making the film, it's like, oh yeah, I have like a stripper pole in my basement, and I give dudes private lap dances, to get by. And then my baby daddy is in prison, and these are white working class people. And it's just like, you kind of see these stories and these situations and you're like, wow, how are we even going to contemplate navigating out of this? And especially when a leadership class that half of it, the kind of Republican, conservative establishment, I don't think has a good understanding of these lives. And the other half actually just degrades and despises these people. And it's a recipe that the working class of all racial backgrounds is unrepresented in politics. And therefore, the solutions that we come up with sound good for people that are kind of, graduate degree level education and up. But once they actually trickle down and filter down to people on the street and in these communities, are just hopelessly out of touch.
Yeah. I remember back in 2014 and 15 even 2012 when all this race stuff started really kicking back up again. And if you look at Google search results for intersectionality and a few other search terms, you can see it's like the 2011 just straight up. So around 2011, 2012 when all the race talk started up again, my first thought was like, are you kidding me? This is a class. It's class. We're talking about class thing here. And the underclass of America is the one that's paying the price. White, black, brown, whatever the case may be. People living in areas where there's just been stripped of economic opportunity, stripped of their community, stripped of any hope because of the corporate uniparty, the merger between the Republicans, the Democrats, the neoliberalists, all of them thinking, oh, hey, we just open up the world. Everything will be great. We'll trade with everybody. Nothing bad will happen. Only good things will happen from free trade. And it's just been proven wrong. It's just been proven wrong. And it's really fascinating to me. I don't know when you were living in Seattle, but at the end, well, I know recently, but if you were there in the end of the 90s when they had the WTO protests,
Yeah.
and it was the black bloc left, sort of Antifa-esque, was there protesting. And what they were protesting against was the admissions of China into the WTO.
Yeah.
And their arguments were that there would be a race to the bottom, right? A race to the bottom on environmental standards, a race to the bottom on labor conditions, a race to the bottom on wages. And I'm not sure about the labor conditions thing, but I know for sure that as we offshored manufacturing to China, they increased their carbon emissions, and it was bad for the environment overall. And I do know that as we offshored all of our manufacturing around the world, it did cause a race to the bottom on wages. In fact, it just went, the wages went from good to not lower, but from good to zero, right? So there was a total collapse to the bottom. And it's ironic to me to think that those guys were, quote, of the left, protesting against these policies that were being implemented at that time, protesting against Bill Clinton, protesting against the neoliberal sort of uniparty. And it turns out now that these are right side talking points now. And it's people on the right who are focused on the impact of globalization and what it means to the working class and the actual citizens, not actual, but we're all citizens of America, but the working class citizens of America in areas geographically that were, sort of the heart of America, the heartland, as it were. And it's just weird how everything has sort of like been turned upside down. And this whole discussion about class and the impact on the poor working people of America is just gone. And everything now is exclusively about how the United States is racist. And that's the biggest problem. Not that we've destroyed the economy from the inside. Not that we've handed over all of our power to a uniparty beholden to corporations that don't care about us. Not that any of those things. And they've obscured the conversation to the point now where it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse. The opioid crisis continuing. No, people aren't talking.
When's the last time we talked about that? Exactly. Yeah. It's like gone. Yeah. I mean, I think, the awful truth is that in the minds of many policymakers, they're not going to tell you this, but in the kind of background of the minds of many policymakers, those are jobs that are disposable. And ultimately, those are people and cultures that are disposable.
Yeah.
And, no one's going to say that, but the actions kind of reveal that to be true. And it's like, I think, you look back at the 90s where you had, the Pat Buchanans and the Ross Perot's on the kind of populist right. You had the other folks on the kind of populist left warning about this stuff. And the idea was that, well, we're going to benefit tremendously as consumers, getting kind of reducing the kind of price of goods, and then we'll retrain and kind of redistribute the individual workers who are harmed. And, yeah, we can go to Target and buy stuff cheaply. Like I do it, and I'm sure you do it, and everyone does it. It's like it's good, but the lie really was that the retraining of mill workers or whatever factory workers was going to be great and easy. I mean, I think they knew even at the time that that was a lie.
Yeah,
I think it
but
was.
they certainly didn't tell people. They weren't like, okay, guys, look, we're going to do this,
Yeah.
and the consequences are going to be generational carnage.
Yeah.
Everybody ready for that?
And I think too, it's there's some value in making things, and I think we saw that with the coronavirus, where people were like, "Where do we get our asprin from?" And it's like 90% of our asprin comes from China.
Where do we
and
get our
it's like,
insulin?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, whoa, this opens us up to be extremely weak, to have these massive weak spots, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of that. And I don't know. I mean, Youngstown steel factories, steel mills are not going to come back. That's for sure. Definitely in the short and medium term. But I don't know. We'll see. Like, what do we want to be as a country? What price do we want to pay? Right? There's always a price to pay, and I think having been on the more libertarian kind of point of view earlier in my 20s, and then having changed recently, it's like, you know what? I'm willing to pay a little bit more for a car or a toaster or a whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like the price, like the factored into the low price is a high cost. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, I'm kind of like interested in thinking of, balancing those things out, and not everything can be reduced to a dollar price. And, those are incentives, but I think values should be kind of higher than incentives in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's the struggle. Organizing large groups of people to do things is usually more about incentives than it is about values. And, if we all just decided to, quote, buy American, it would take time. It would happen. I mean, even Japan, I'm not saying it's feasible. I'm just saying that would be something that could do it. That was sort of the idea around tariffs in general. Even the Japanese realized during Corona, they're like, holy crap, we got to start a program to get any manufacturing out of China and back into Japan. I mean, there was a certain naive, again, dumb or diabolical. This is my favorite conversation. Was the Uniparty dumb or diabolical? Were they naive when they thought, hey, we just open up to China and everything will get better? We'll make more money and everybody will have cheaper TVs and everybody will be richer. Or did they know that China is a hostile force who is truly mercantilist in the sense that they're out there just acquiring gold, like in the old days? They're just trying to pile up gold, pile up assets, pile up money. That's their job. Their job is to suck assets into China and suck capital into China, and they can sit on it. Were they dumb? Were they diabolical? Or is the system just too complex? That's really the question now. The system is too complex for any group, any one person to say, this is the right way, we should go this way. Complexity rules us all at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think with China, I've been to China maybe, I don't know, 10 times. And I lived there for a year. I directed a documentary about China and the treatment of the Uyghurs.
So impressive, Chris.
Yeah, but so I kind of have a sense of it on the ground. And I think China policy was driven by American executives who felt like, and the executives felt like, wow, if China opens up as a market for American products, we can actually make and sell stuff to the Chinese and dramatically enrich ourselves while also enriching China. Politically, you have to remember that this all happened in the wake of the Cold War ending. So we let our guard down. We thought that kind of communism, authoritarianism had been permanently discredited and debunked with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we also saw that countries like India started moving away from their socialist economics in the early 90s. China had already made that shift under Deng Xiaoping. And we thought that with the kind of rising economic fortunes, there would be a kind of political liberalization. And so we went to a double liberalization, economic liberalization, political liberalization. That was the kind of goal. And you know what? Looking back, honestly, I mean, it's a persuasive case. It really is a persuasive case. And I think that it was just turned out to be wrong. And I think now our job is not to say, well, we should have followed the anarchists in 99 in Seattle. But our thing is saying, okay, how can we kind of hedge against China? How can we accept that China is an authoritarian state? It's going to be an authoritarian state. And then how can we really treat them as a kind of strategic, frenemy, a kind of adversary and partner? And that's the work that we have to do now. And I think, this is we're getting real deep on everything now, but it's like we need to revive the old Anglosphere. We need to unite with India in a deep way. India is the largest democracy in the history of the world. It has kind of it absorbs some of those British customs and institutions, and kind of open language communication, even with English being the second language. We also have to unite with some of those other kind of Southeast Asian countries and Australia and New Zealand and other countries to kind of create this kind of ring and counterbalance against China.
Man, there's a lot there. Christopher Rufo, such an impressive guy, dude. It's like we didn't get to talk in depth about your most recent documentary, and then you just slide in the fact I've been to China 10 times and did a documentary on the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
Dude, you've been grinding at this stuff for a long time and really thinking about these issues really deeply.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to say to you, I'm really impressed with your, you have a question, you go to the source.
Yeah,
you're going to these towns. You're going and talking and sitting in people's living rooms and looking at the stripper pools in their basements and talking to people sitting on the side of the street who all they do all day is just sit in a folding chair because they don't have a job and nothing to do and they're sick. You find out about something bad going on in China. You get on a plane. You go. Maybe you took a boat.
And that's the thing, man. It's reality, right? And I think that in a way, sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe, should I have gotten a PhD? Should I have gone for a kind of academic thing? Should I blah, blah, blah? Those doubts that are just in your mind. And then it's like, yeah, but like, there's no substitute for like, if you like want to learn about drugs, when you're, suited up in Kevlar and, one step behind, bounty hunters kicking down doors, you're going to learn a lot about drugs, from that kind of up close and personal. So I think there's no substitute for it. Yeah.
Incredible. Kudos to you. Too many people just sit around pontificating and spewing stuff into the, atmosphere and just not actually doing the research and not doing the work and the legwork and putting in the time and energy, Chris. So impressive stuff, man. And,
thanks, man. It's really good to catch up with you in this 2021.
Really yeah, totally, man. Just a couple more questions for you before we start to wrap this up. You did a lot of good work on CRT. You really brought it into the forefront. You got it in front of the president. You got Betsy DeVos talking about it. You got us all talking about it. They took action. What's going to happen to that action? What's going to happen to the executive orders? What's going to happen to the policies that were put in place? What's going to happen to what seemed like the beginning of momentum institutionally to fight back against that? What's going to happen now?
Well, I think it's almost 100% certainty, if you look at how Biden is staffing up, that they're going to wipe that executive order quickly, very quickly. So that's going to be gone. But two things. One is that it's now out in the open, right? This was a kind of hidden process. It's now out in the open and subject to public debate. So that victory is going to last. And then second, I'm going to just maybe tease this, but I can't be very explicit about it. Can't give you too much more information. But there are some people that are now mobilizing. Some of the brightest minds in the legal field that are taking a hard look at this issue. And I think that when Biden announces, or the Biden administration announces the end of the executive order on critical race theory, I would encourage everyone to check my Twitter feed. And there might be some surprise and dramatic announcements that will be made there.
So you guys have something laying in wait, ready to go?
Yeah, there's I can say this without revealing the content. I have a press release that's already a PDF. So at the right time and to maximize, the media exposure, when they make an announcement, I'm going to make a counter announcement.
Fantastic. I love the way you're thinking. People, if you want to make a difference out there in the world, take a look at this guy, Christopher Rufo, and do what he does, man. He does not sit around and wait. He goes out, he takes action, he investigates, he figures things out, gets to the truth, gets to answers, makes a plan, organizes resources, takes it to the people that need to listen, comes up with strategy, comes up with a plan, waiting in advance, knowing things are going to happen, moving in anticipation. This is what we need more of. People taking action, being proactive, thinking about what's coming down the road, being prepared for counter moves. And like that's what we need, dude. We need to capture more of that spirit and get that out there. So I'm going to do whatever I can to promote that energy and to get your words out there and to get your vibe out into the atmosphere, man, because that's exactly what we need. Too long we've been sitting back and just reacting. In this case, you're ready to go, and I appreciate that. And dude, you're doing great work, and anything I can do to support you along the way, I really just let me know. I'm going to keep doing it, and it's going to be good stuff, man. It's worthwhile, and it's just really it's a privilege and honor to talk to you, man. I really appreciate
likewise. Yeah, no, it's great. And for all of you guys watching, I actually had coffee with Jack when I was in DC. It was awesome to make that online offline connection, and
Totally.
hope to do it again in this year and catch up. And I want to also learn more about the Liminal Order. Sounds like a great network of people. We can chat offline about that. And
Definitely.
just now's the time, man. You also kind of laid the foundation for that, and it's looking more and more prescient and more timely. And you're already there. You're a couple years ahead of the game.
Yeah, thank you very much. All of the thesis that I laid out for the Liminal Order, you can find it at liminal-order.com. It's all come true, and it's all just getting worse, actually. And the case is just getting stronger. And if the numbers mean anything, the public sees it the same way too. We signed up 1,000 people on the wait list in just the last 10 days or so.
Wow.
People are really interested. They're feeling it. They want to do something. They want to be surrounded by people who see the world the same way they do. And they want to be proactive, and they want to take action, and they want to help themselves and help their families, help their communities, just like you're doing, just like I'm trying to do. We got to stick together through this, man. It's going to be crazy times coming up. Who the hell knows what's going to happen, bro?
So how big, what are your projections? What are your goals for the community at the end of this year?
We're at 425 right now. And we've got like almost 4,500 people on the wait list. I am planning to process about 50 people a month, because we do personal interviews for every single person. We do vetting, we do onboarding, we do like a little boot camp. We can only actually physically onboard like 50 people a month.
Yeah,
so hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be maybe up around 1,000.
Nice, great.
Yeah.
1,000 people can make a big change. That's
Absolutely.
a strong network. So
Yeah, and it's just
awesome,
the
man. Well,
man.
really appreciate it. Good to connect with you. And anyone listening, if you have any questions, just find me on Twitter or my website, and we'll get in touch.
Everybody out there, follow Christopher Rufo. Everybody out there, go watch his documentary. I'll put the link in the show notes. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time today, and I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
All right.